Welcome to a short presentation where we will provide some information about the forward statewide assessment that is aligned to the 2021 Wisconsin's Standards for Mathematics. I am Mary Mooney, one of DPI's 2 math consultants, and today I am presenting alongside my colleague, Julie Bormet. Let's take a look at the goals we have for our session today. There are 3 overarching goals of this presentation that we feel will support the field when preparing for the upcoming forward assessment. From 2020 to 2021, 4 teams of Wisconsin educators reviewed and made revisions to the standards in grades K through 2, 3-5, 6-8, and in high school, with the current standards being adopted in 2021. That signaled and began the work of aligning resources, instruction, and assessment to the new standards. Today, we will share how the new standards prompted changes to the statewide assessment known as the Forward. The second goal is to understand the changes of the assessment by looking at resources available on the DPI website. And lastly, this presentation can provide opportunities to reflect on your role or how your school has attended to the changes and how to think through next steps. Over the few years, this has been the recommended plan to transition from the previous standards to the current expectations in mathematics outcomes, and it may look familiar as it was the same graphic used in other content areas. This presentation is based on the recommendation above, and it is understandable that many districts will be at various points of this rollout. And while the slide looks like a linear process, it is not, and we recommend you think through where your district, school, or classrooms have taken action and where action is still needed throughout this presentation. As I mentioned, this is a generalized process, and in the next slide, we will look at how this process looks specifically with the changes in mathematics. So to think through the phase-by-phase rollout of alignment to the standards, I want to draw your attention to the shifts of the standards. One of the most important changes in the standards was in reframing the shifts and adding 2 new shifts that support the field in understanding high-level changes. The shifts serve to support conversations about how to understand the mathematics expectations for grades kindergarten throughout high school, from the previous standards to the current standards. Specifically, the shift of focus is the emphasis from learning procedures to calculate or compute to building an understanding of how key mathematical ideas and concepts grow and to justify problem-solving solutions. The shift of focus is now summarized as all students engage in mathematics that is focused on developing deep understanding and connections among mathematical concepts in order to gain strong foundations to move their mathematics learning forward. So in phase 1, it was recommended that educators learn about the shift of focus in terms of grade level expectations and about what mathematics is key in supporting students in powerful math concepts and ideas. In phase 2, the recommendation was to look at, examine, and interrogate how current materials, curriculum, and instruction help to support the work of attending to the shift of focus and making necessary changes. And finally, in phase 3 would be to implement those changes. This process illustrates how the alignment looks with respect to curriculum and materials. We're going to now take a look at what this means in terms of the forward statewide assessment. And here you'll see something that is referred to as the forward blueprint. The blueprint is a document of the structure of the assessment with respect to the domains in each grade level of 3rd grade through 8th grade. Essentially, this document shows the alignment to the shift of focus at this high-level summative assessment. Each grade level of mathematics has a unique page that explains how the makeup of the assessment aligns to the shift of focus with respect to the number of questions or points students will see on the assessment. In the first column, you'll see that it includes the domain, that is in bold, and the cluster statement. The domain is the highest level that helps us categorize the mathematics. So the first category in bold is operations and algebraic thinking. The cluster statements, denoted by the capital letters, are short phrases or sentences that summarize groups of standards. The first column, or sorry, the M, the S, or the A in the second column denotes what aspect of the shift of focus is aligned to those cluster statements. So in this case, in the first example, nope, I'm going to go to the second example. You'll see there's an M, number and operations in base 10. There's an M in the second column next to the two cluster statements. This means that domain and those cluster statements make up part of the major work of the grade. It is important that this assessment includes more space and questions that reflect that, and you will see that in the numbers. And they will have significantly more questions than you would find with the supporting or the additional clusters. It is important that the assessment and the curriculum are aligned. So in the previous slides, we had you quickly think about how the shift of focus appears in curriculum materials and classroom assessment. And this is really the work that is being done at the statewide with respect to the statewide assessment. We'll give you some more information. If this does seem like new learning for some of you, we will give you some additional resources at the end of this presentation. So we learned a little bit about how the alignment of the standards might look with respect to the statewide assessment. And it is important to consider how this assessment fits into a larger landscape of assessment. Here you will see further recommendations to think about how alignment might appear in classroom, school, or district assessment systems. Each type of assessment is important information about how students are experiencing and achieving in mathematics. In this slide, I'd really like to draw your attention to the graphic. The blue component of the ring is a graphic representation of really time and efforts spent in assessment that are really directed at student learning. That is the formative assessment cycles that are included in daily lessons. This is where teachers can be most responsive to students in their classrooms. In contrast, the forward assessment is a small part of the ring and typically informs educators on the health of the systems and structures in which students learn. So now that you've seen the resources regarding alignment and assessment, both at a local and a state level, I will turn it over to Julie to explain some additional resources we have for you.
Another resource available for Wisconsin schools and districts are the new practice tests. And on this slide, you'll find a link to the DPI assessment webpage that's dedicated to these practice tests. Since practice questions aren't confidential like the forward questions themselves, the practice questions can be used in a variety of ways. First, they can be used for student practice, a chance for students to get comfortable with the testing environment while using math skills and knowledge at their current grade level. The environment includes both the format of the test and the types of questions they'll need to answer. The online practice tests are a new feature since practice questions were only available as PDF documents in the past. For mathematics, there are 2 sessions available for each grade level, and these sessions are not as long as an actual forward test session, but do include more questions than previous practice tests. The use of these practice sessions can be very helpful in supporting students to be comfortable with the forward, but working through these questions is certainly not a replacement for student access to deep learning opportunities aligned to the Wisconsin standards for mathematics. These practice tests can also support professional learning. Educators can use the practice tests to learn about the composition of the assessment, and educators can also use practice questions to promote discussions about standards, curriculum, instruction, and assessment, possibly within a PLC in their local school. And finally, the practice tests can be used to improve instruction. Teachers can use practice questions within classroom activities to reason about solution strategies with their students, and also to reason about why some of the incorrect options might not or might be good distractors. Digging into why someone might have answered the question a certain way can really help students go deep with the mathematics. Another resource to support Wisconsin schools and districts in engaging with the forward test is the quick guide you see here. By going to the link on this slide, you can find a concise 4-page document that provides an overview of how to get started with the forward practice tests, covers the purposes of the practice tests, similar to what was discussed on our last slide, gives step-by-step directions for how to access the online version, and describes the accessibility features of the forward. I do want you to note, though, that while the quick guide focuses on the online practice tests, the practice test webpage on the previous slide will also provide access to PDF versions if those are needed. So once you and your students have logged in and you have access to the practice tests, and actually when I say logged in, I don't mean that there's a password or anything, but once you get to the website and find the link and you have access to the practice tests, what will you find there? Well, in the testing environment, many of the forward questions will look very familiar, with a question and multiple choice answers, asking for students to choose one correct option, like the example here on the left. New this year, there will also be some questions that have 2 correct options, like the example on the right. These items are worth up to 2 points and support multiple ways to think about mathematics and the fact that in math, there sometimes isn't exactly one right answer. The use of the practice test, as mentioned earlier, is an especially important opportunity for students to get comfortable with the testing environment. The examples you see on this slide show you just a few of the many ways that students might be asked to interact with forward questions. Sometimes students might be asked to complete a visual representation that has already been started, actually engaging in doing the mathematics. Some examples of this are drawing a line to partition Henry's classroom floor to match an expression for finding the area of the floor, completing a bar graph, or plotting a point on a number line that already contains some information. And sometimes students will simply need to provide a solution. Solutions can be entered on a keypad, chosen by dragging and dropping words or symbols, or providing check marks within a table, like the prime and composite example you see here. Again, these are some examples of the many ways students might be asked to interact with forward questions. Another goal of these practice tests is to bring some new questions that reflect specific standards revisions and support students and educators in beginning to understand what assessment of these revised standards might look like. The example you see here is connected to a 4th grade number and operations in base 10 standard. This standard used to be specifically about rounding multi-digit numbers. But in 2021, this Wisconsin standard was expanded to include a variety of estimation strategies, like using benchmark numbers, compatible numbers, as well as rounding. Now, instead of asking students to engage in the rote procedure of rounding a number to the nearest hundred, for example, this question asks students to choose how they'd like to interact with the data presented in order to determine a best estimate. One summative assessment question can never capture all that is important in learning toward a standard. There are so many more important opportunities available within classroom lessons and conversations with students to dig into the depth of goals like this. Know that DPI and our assessment vendor continue to work on developing questions that assess our Wisconsin standards and also bring flexibility to how students might engage with a question when the standard calls for it. Based on the 2021 Wisconsin Standards for Mathematics, we now do have some revised student outcomes. And while the vast majority of these outcomes are represented on the forward, each and every one of those outcomes may not be, because a few of them are really not best measured through a multiple choice testing format. An example of one outcome that isn't best suited for the forward is the K-12 math modeling progression found within our standards. And while there are student expectations that support mathematical modeling as a process involving problem posing, testing, revising, and decision making, that's challenging to capture on the forward. Assessment of mathematical modeling needs to focus on the process of modeling and not simply the solutions that come out as an end result. And with that in mind, make sure that students have access to the entirety of their grade level standards in order for them to be successful with the full range of Wisconsin student expectations. Classroom assessments will be key in these areas. We hope that the information that Mary and I have shared with you and the resources that are available will support you as you prepare for the 2024 forward testing window. This year, the window is March 18th to April 26th of 2024. The forward test is informed annually by educators around Wisconsin. We hope you'll consider sharing your expertise and perspective by applying to participate in one or more of the educator opportunities you see here on this slide. Please also pass this information to colleagues at your school or district so that they can consider the opportunity as well. The forward standard setting and item review can be applied for through the same link. The ACT standard setting has a different link. Notice that each of the meetings has a different application deadline. For a little background, a standard setting occurs for a statewide assessment whenever academic standards have been revised. And during standard setting, educators will establish descriptions for each performance level associated with the assessment and make recommendations for the cut scores necessary to be classified into each level. During item review, educators review all new items that have been created for the exam, looking at content, grade level appropriateness, alignment to the correct standard, cultural inclusivity, and bias and sensitivity issues. This is a great opportunity to be a part of assessment development, provide valuable feedback, and have detailed input about the items for the forward exam. You can also take knowledge back to your district about the process. Finally, thank you for choosing to spend some of your valuable time with us. We hope that you have gained an understanding about the alignment of the forward to the Wisconsin Standards for Mathematics, an understanding of the changes that you'll find in the forward beginning in March, know where to find some valuable resources to support you and your students, and have begun or have continued to reflect on your local efforts regarding the phase-by-phase rollout for the 2021 math standards, so you can consider what your next steps are. Please reach out to Mary or me using the contact information we've provided here with any questions you might have or stories you'd like to share. We'd love to hear from educators across Wisconsin. Also on this slide is the DPI Math website. This website is another important place to go to support your local mathematics work. Thanks again for listening.